So I'm sitting here in this fuzzy blanket hoodie, and I thought, well, while I'm comfortable and sitting near my camera, I should probably film my top books of 2023. I don't think I'm going to do a top 10. I think I'm going to give my top 3 and my reasons why, along with some of the favorites of the year. I think that's the best way to do it. Top 10s, everyone's just going to skip to the end or something. And I really just want to use this time at the end of the year as a way to reflect on my new BookTube channel and just reflect on what I've read in general and just have a little chat with y'all about the things I've enjoyed this year. So let's get into it. I guess let's start with some notable mentions and some things I enjoyed this year and some things I didn't enjoy. We're just kind of playing this one by ear. I read more Robert E. Howard this year than I have read in my entire life. And I started with The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane. This is the Del Rey illustrated collection. These are the ones you buy. They're like the best. And this book's not good. Solomon Kane is not good. He has one good story, and this sounds absolutely insane, but it's the first story where Solomon Kane fights what appears to be an autistic ghost. And then he ends up solving a mystery of how this person became a ghost, and it's pretty cool. I like that story, but the rest of the stories are like Dark Heart of Africa, except incredibly racist. He'll spend an entire paragraph explaining what a character looks like that he's about to kill, that's only there for him to kill. But then for a sidekick who shows up in 2 stories, he refers to him as basically the black guy. And that's all the explanation you ever get about him. It's like, ooh, I don't think I need that. Even having those the way they are, if you're a completionist for Robert E. Howard, I suggest you get them. But other than that, I would spend your time reading other stuff from Robert E. Howard, like these bad boys. The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian is the first one in the Del Rey Illustrated collection, and then The Bloody Crown of Conan is the second one in the collection. Another honorable mention is Hyperion. I don't have a good copy and I can't find my paperback right now. Holy crap, that book is good. It would easily be in my top 10 if I had a top 10. I've been hard pressed to find sci-fi I really enjoy lately, and the fact that I picked that up and it just blew me away and made me feel stupid that I hadn't read it over the last decade that I had seen it recommended just really says something about it. Another big shout out is everything I read on Appendix N. I can't believe that Appendix N has been around for so long but is so rarely talked about among regular fantasy nerds. Like, you have to be a fantasy nerd and a D&D nerd in order to know anything about Appendix N, which honestly, just fantasy nerds could use it as a guide for reading older science fiction and fantasy. You don't need to care about D&D at all. Just pick up Appendix N and just dig in. My top 3, 2 of the top 3 are from Appendix N because they completely changed the way I look at books. And I've talked about them before. We're going to step to the side real quick and talk about something totally different because that's how my brain works. I read a lot about the history of Dungeons and Dragons over the last 2 or 3 years, and Game Wizards, The Epic Battle for Dungeons and Dragons, is one of my favorites on the history of D&D. John Peterson is just great at telling the story of Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's the best blending of being comprehensive while also being a compelling read. I think there's others out there that might have like a little more info, or some that are a lot more narrative driven, that are a lot more entertaining to read, but I think this is a perfect blend of like comprehensive coverage of the story itself and narrative that keeps you engaged as a reader. And now this skews a lot more into the comprehensive side, but if any of you tabletop RPG nerds out there really want to dig into something, I highly recommend Designers and Dragons by Shannon Appelkline. So what this is the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and it is a comprehensive dive into the tabletop RPG industry. It's everything. It talks about what games came out every single year, and the way that Shannon Appelkline does it is, like in the first one, starts with the founding days, which of course, Dungeons and Dragons. And so you're looking at TSR, and it follows TSR all the way to the demise of TSR in 97. And so what you do is each book shows you the history of a company from the time it started. So if they started in 1979, then it's in this book, the 70s, but it follows them all the way to their end. And some of those companies ended like 6 years later. So you're looking at 79 to 85, or for TSR, it's 73 or whatever to 1997. And so then when you get into the 80s, it shows you the new companies that started in the 80s. So whatever company from 1983 and where they ended up. And what's really interesting about these books is they were written right before 5e absolutely hit critical mass. So a lot of them are like, well, we don't know where this company is going to end up, but hopefully things are turning around. And it ends ends up being some company that made like a 5e Kickstarter that made $1 million or something, you know, a few years after the books were published, which that also is cool. One of the things I like about older books that cover a history of something is you view them as like a time capsule for the time they were written. So you're seeing this stuff and you're seeing the author discuss whether or not it's going to have a future, and you already know whether it's going to have a future, and that's super cool. And it's just one of those things to reflect on, just how quickly things can change. There's my interlude for nerding out about the tabletop RPG industry, and I highly recommend them. They're good to just dig through, just find a company you're interested in and read it. I did that with a couple of them, and I ended up just starting over and reading them all over the last year, probably over a 9-month span. I read all 4 of those books. They were just my bedtime read. Like I just do like any other normal person does and read about the history of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop games before they go to sleep. Perfectly normal. Speaking of perfectly normal, let's talk about some more nonfiction. That's what we do on Fantasy BookTube, is talk about nonfiction. Well, with this book, we do Wizardry and Wild Romance. This is the second time I've read Wizardry and Wild Romance, and it was much more rewarding this time because I've read a lot of the books that Michael Moorcock talks about in here now. For anyone that doesn't know, Wizardry and Wild Romance is Michael Moorcock's study of the epic fantasy genre, its origins all the way up to, I think, now-ish. He covers some newer stuff because this is like a revised edition. The original edition came out in the 80s. And man, you talk about a genius. I've never seen someone with the ability to just talk about the fantasy genre like Michael Moorcock does in this book. Like, you talk about deep cuts, he's got the deepest cuts. It's like he knows everything about the origins of this genre, and it's just amazing. And he kind of helps you kind of put the pieces together. He's almost like just the crazy guy plotting everything out, and then you just get to follow it and put everything together, and it's fantastic. It gave me a much greater appreciation for the fantasy genre, and I think it's like a must own for people who are really into fantasy. And you better get a copy now because it's out of print and they ain't getting any cheaper. I've already warned people before, but man, get yourself a copy, seriously. While we're on this nonfiction train, I want to talk about my favorite time in history. Not because it was fun for anyone, it was only fun for very few people that happen to be incredibly wealthy or ruling countries, which implies they're incredibly wealthy. This book is probably the best introduction to my favorite time in history, and that is The Republic for Which It Stands: The United States During Reconstruction and the Gilded Age, 1865 to 1896. The thing I like about this book in particular is it gives you such a smooth sailing through this time and just lets you kind of get a sample of all of the events that really mattered. It's not just talking about wars, because there were very few wars at this time in the United States, but it does cover like the little skirmishes and the fights with the Native Americans and stuff like that. And it also has an amazing bibliographical essay at the back. And like, holy crap, it guides you through everything they used, all their sources. Some of those I've bought and read, and man, they're really good. And this is incredibly comprehensive, and the audiobook is fantastic. I listened to it on my way to and from work, and man, just got to fill your brain with that knowledge. And I really enjoy this time in history because it was the most rapid change in lifestyles for people. You look at that, and there's a reason why it's sometimes called the Second Industrial Revolution. We had the Industrial Revolution, which changed things, but the Second Industrial Revolution completely changed the way everyone lives. Yes, it took an extreme exploitation of the people at the bottom, and it turned our cities into hellscapes where you only live to be like 40 because you get black lung from spending more than an hour outside. But if you look at the beginning of the Reconstruction Age and the end of the Gilded Age, so much changed. It's unbelievable. And so I highly recommend it just for that. Let's move on from nonfiction. If anyone ever really wants me to do a nonfiction video, I'm down for it. All my nonfiction book reviews, like 5 people watch them, so it's kind of demotivating. But if anyone wants me to make a nonfiction video or even something specifically about the Gilded Age, I'd love to do it. Just let me know in the comments. So I was initially going to have a top 3, and then I realized I couldn't slim it down to 3, and that 3 is a magic number, but also an arbitrary number. So we're going to pick another arbitrary number, and we're going to go with my top 4. Flowers for Algernon. Holy crap. This is just, what am I supposed to say? I guess the only thing I can say is whenever I tell people that I read it, they go, oh, I read that in school, and man, it broke my heart. And I think, why didn't I get to read it in school? I read stupid crap in school, and this was being read other places in school. Like, come on, why didn't they let let us do something like the short story. Flowers for Algernon is beautiful, just like this cat. He jumped up here and got in my way and started screaming at me, so here he is now. I highly recommend it to anyone that hasn't read it. It's short. If you really want to save even more time, read the short story. But I haven't read the short story yet. I plan on reading it. I went with the novel because I understood that it did a deeper dive into Charlie as a character, and I wanted that. I wanted more of it, and I highly recommend it. These books really aren't in a particular order, I guess. Like number 1 and number 2 are kind of tied, so I guess we could call this one number 3. That's Ken Follett's Fall of Giants. I had never read Ken Follett. I enjoyed historical fiction. I didn't realize Ken Follett was one of the best at historical fiction. And holy crap, I talked about the Gilded Age, but man, I love World War I. Like, not because of all the people dying from it. It's just the war I like exploring the most because both sides were the bad guys. They were both imperialist turds that were fighting each other for really stupid reasons, and the only people that suffered were the people at the bottom. This book does a great job of showing that. It does such a great job of looking at both ends. You've got like a British lord at the top who is just blind to the stupidity of his government, and then you've got the working class at the bottom who are the victims of the stupidity of his government, along with the POV of a German and the POV of 2 Russian brothers, and you get to witness the Russian Revolution and the way Russia fought in World War I. And it even sneaks in a bunch of stuff that I knew about World War I that most people just don't. It's not like a common thing unless you've done deep dives into the subject, and Ken Follett does a great job of just throwing them right into the story, and I think it's wonderful. It's a great way of getting people who don't know a lot about that time in history into understanding some things that went on, and they can look and be like, what? There were American soldiers in Eastern Russia in 1919? What is happening? And then, you end up looking it up and you're like, oh, wow. Okay. That explains why there's Westinghouse Mosin-Nagants. So that's always interesting. That book's fantastic. It could easily have been number 1 if it weren't for these next 2 that just changed the way I read books. Let me step aside from this for a minute and just explain. I don't know if these are the best books, like when it comes to quality of writing, but what they mean to me is how much they affect me as an individual and how much they've changed the way I view books. And so let's start with The Broken Sword by Poul Anderson. It changed how I look at the history of fantasy. I thought fantasy, started with Lord of the Rings, and then everyone copied after that and all that good stuff. And I mean, The Broken Sword came out the same year as The Fellowship of the Ring, and it could not be more different. It's brutal, it's graphic, people are adults in all of the best and worst ways. I mean, you get like a few chapters in and someone gets their head caved in, and you do not expect it, and then it happens, and you're just like, what? And so, man, Broken Sword, it's so beautifully written in a way that you will not see in any other books. It's just incredible. So that's why that one is tied for first with, everyone should have guessed it, Lord of Light. Lord of Light, it's beautiful. There's just not much else to it. I sat down and skimmed a couple pages a couple days ago, and it was hard to read through my tears because I decided I wanted to read the most emotional part of the entire book again. And to see the destruction of such a beautiful person, I mean, like everyone says when they talk about upsetting parts of books, oh, this broke me, blah, blah, blah. It's always about a death. I mean, there's plenty of deaths in there. You ain't going to know till it happens. And man, it just hits so hard. But yeah, as you can tell by this, Lord of Light's hard to talk about. It's the reason I haven't done a review. I want to read it again, but I'm waiting because my wife wants to read it as well. And so, yeah, Lord of Light is number 1. It's number 1 because I didn't think science fiction and fantasy could be merged the way it did. I didn't think that a book could be written with such beautiful epic prose with grounded real people in it at the same time. And the book is so short. I just don't understand how Roger Zelazny was such a master of his craft. The book's under 240 pages, but it feels like it has the same depth as like a 900-page book now. So that's my chat about my top 4. They're so good. I mean, I read the most books I've ever read in a year this year, and they were all pretty good to amazing. It kind of helps that I've been getting recommendations from people in the BookTube community. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for watching my channel, being here and leaving comments. Everyone's been so nice. and so wonderful. Even the person that told me that I would understand Lord of the Rings and appreciate it more when I'm older. I mean, I read it for the first time 23 years ago. I don't know how much older I have to be. Thank you for the comment. Thanks everyone else who gives me book recommendations and feedback. 2023 has been an awesome year. It was a great year to start a BookTube channel, and I can't wait to see what happens in 2024. I've already talked about my first project for 2024 with reading everything Glenn Cook has ever written, and I can't wait to share everything with you. The Dread Empire is insane and amazing in all the best ways. I can't wait to talk about it. And I guess with that, I'll see you next time.